individually. But it's a growth process. It's a journey process. And it calls for us to look at these examples of those that were molded and shaped. To look at them and see there wasn't resistance. In fact, every time he called one of these guys, they followed. Oh, we see others as he goes on. Man, let me go bury my father. Let me go say goodbye to my friends. Boy, give everything I have to the poor and follow. Boy, those were tough things. They're still tough today. And yet the call is still there. Come, follow me. Be my disciple. But there's a cost, A, on your outline. Under 3, there's a cost. Think about this. Matthew was at his richest when Jesus called him to be a disciple. He was at his richest. Man, he had wealth. We know that, and we'll see that more next week because he throws a big party. He throws a banquet. Man, you know what? It's costly today to throw a banquet. Do you think it was less costly then? And he could afford to do that. He was at his richest when he was called. When Jesus spoke to him, the pull of the world and the pull of his wealth was at its greatest. And sometimes today when Jesus is calling us, boy, he's calling us to reach out, to touch somebody, to provide help, to move somebody along. And sometimes it's not what I want to do. And the pull is great. And we have a choice. He's always given you and I a choice. As he called all these things, all those riches, as he called Matthew, were forgotten in an instant. I had to ask myself, how do I measure up at that point? How do I measure up? Forgot them for the opportunity to follow Jesus. He didn't know what he was in for. Peter, James, and John, and Andrew, and Philip, and Nathaniel didn't know what they were in for at that time. But yet they each followed because they believed he had the answer to life. He had the answer for eternity. They believed he was the promised one. And he's still all those things today, but do we believe it? Do we believe he has the answers for our life? Or do we think, boy, the world's got the answers for my life? One of the pastors at the conference, he was a builder. He was bivocational, and he was a high school wrestling coach and coached other things. And they built a house in California that when he came here, his wife was still there at the time, was worth over $1 million. And they had looked at that would be their retirement. When they sold that house, that would be their retirement. He lost the house because in the 3 years that he was here pastoring, couldn't get it sold. And he came here, and then his wife finally came. And then, can't remember what the health issue he had, but they were doing a minor surgery, and they pierced his heart. And they had to do open heart surgery. Lost his house, lost his health. There's a cost. And yet, you listen to him, how he loves the Lord. They're trusting that God's still providing. It's an incredible thing. And that's where each of us are at. We don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. And we see that in Matthew. He doesn't know what the future holds. He knows it holds not having a job. He knows that all this wealth that he has amassed at this time, that's going to be a cost to him. And later, if I've cheated anybody, let me know. Or Zacchaeus, if he cheats anybody, let him know, not Matthew. Isn't that incredible? Matthew knew those things, didn't know all these things, and he follows because he believed Jesus had the answer for life. Do you believe that today? Because the same issue faces you and I in this 21st century. We have a choice about what we will pursue. You have a choice what you will pursue every day. Will you pursue to be more like the world? That's a choice. And that's not just a hard choice for our kids. That's a choice for you and I as adults. It's a choice we all have to face. What will you pursue? Will you pursue the things of God? You see, we're back to the two altars, aren't we? Here's the altar over here of self and my wants, my desires. I got to amass a big retirement fund. Man, we live in a volatile world. The stock market dropped. These people, some of the pastors there follow that stuff. Man, I'd have ulcers if I followed it. Man, every time we get a thing, I read Guidestone that says you've lost this much money. I think, man, and they tell me it's paper. Man, don't feel that to my gut. And one of the pastors on Friday said, or I guess it was Friday, we were eating at breakfast, said, boy, the stock market dropped 300 points yesterday. It's like, gee, I needed to hear that. But you know what? God's in control. Who are you pursuing? Are you running to your altar to amass everything you can? Or are you going to the Lord's altar and laying everything you have at the altar and saying, God, I can't, but you can? That's what Matthew did. He had been at his little altar, his tax table. That was his altar. Man, he was serving himself. He was serving Rome, despised by his own people because he had a job that took advantage of them, and he left it to go to the altar of Christ. What will you pursue? Who will you serve? You see, those are questions that are there for you and I today. Every day you get up, you have a choice. What will you pursue? Now, if you work for a company, man, you need to be pursuing the company's improvement. But how are you doing it? In your own skills, or are you doing it to the glory of the Lord? Paul says, do all your work as unto the Lord. Now, boy, young people, he's talking to you too. Do all your work unto the Lord. What work? Do your schoolwork unto the Lord. You have chores around the house? Do your chores unto the Lord. You have a job. Do your job as unto the Lord. Be a person that people will look up to. Say, man, yeah, he's a Christian, but there's a person of integrity. There's a person that's honest. There's a person you can trust. That's a person you can share with. Colleen asked me 29 years ago. Well, maybe a little less than that. Maybe because Amanda had been born, so that's about 25 years ago, just under. Came home from my Tuesday night, which was my long night at the mental health center counseling, and they were at the house. We had Bible study at our house, and I came in, and I don't know what they were talking about. I was beat. I hated Tuesday nights because they were so difficult, worst cases. And she says to me, Chris, if every Christian had a good friend, a true friend, would we need psychologists and counselors? And I said to her, Colleen, you trying to put me out of business? Trying to ruin my income? Because the reality was, if we had true friends, if somebody shared some pain with you, and you were there for them, and didn't go gossip about them. You know this whole thing that's been on TV this past week about the texting and the picture texting stuff. And kids being hurt because they've taken pictures of them that they shouldn't have done, sent it to somebody, and then they text that out to everybody in the world. And they were saying that happened at one of the schools, and within an hour, pretty much every kid in the school that had a cell phone had the picture of this girl. And they made fun of her. We can make a difference. I wondered as I listened to that on Channel 7 the other night, how many of those kids might have been Christians? And they forwarded that picture of that girl onward. I wonder how many of those. She said that this was last year, and she still gets picked on about that today. And I wondered, how many might have been Christians? How often do we join the crowd when they make fun of somebody at work? When they insult somebody? How often do we get caught up in the gossip that takes place? You see, we face the same issues today. And He's still molding and shaping our lives. B on your outline, we cannot succeed in our spiritual lives if our whole heart isn't into it. You will not succeed in your Christian life if your whole heart isn't into it. You will struggle all the time. It's not that you won't struggle some of the time, but you will constantly struggle until you put your heart into it. It is said that the greatest success can only be achieved by giving yourself totally to the things that you wish to achieve. I love the Olympics. Boy, I really like Apollo Ono. Man, he's just a neat guy. And he has put his entire life into skating. I think of the girl from Korea. All that pressure that's put on that young girl, 16 years old, and she's one of the richest people in Korea now. But the pressure to win gold, and if she failed, she would have been a failure. And I wondered how many believers might think that of her. Consider the cost. Those young people have dedicated their lives to that. Man, I look at the football players. You know, one time when I was still youth pastor down in Burley, I said, okay, let's figure out how many colleges. There's a lot of colleges. And figure out how many football teams. How many people on a football team. And go down into high school. And then now we got Pee-wee football and all. And all those kids that want to be great football players, how many of them make it to the top? Not that many. But they've dedicated their lives to that, to try to be the best. Should we do any less as believers? Dedicating our lives to the Lord, being the best of the best that we can be. It will cost. It will cost us to follow Jesus, just as it cost Matthew. Will you pay the cost? Have you considered the cost? Are you willing to step out? Are you willing to make that difference? If you've chosen to follow Jesus, I commend you for making that kind of a decision in your life. But if you're struggling with that decision, man, then I challenge you to look at the promises. I challenge you to find a verse that's an alignment verse that will bring you back under alignment. One of the verses, and I'd say it's the marriage verse, but God keeps speaking it to me, it's Hebrews 13:16. Do not fail to do good and to communicate or to share, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. When the phone rings and I'm tired, I have to think of that verse because I don't want to answer the phone. I'm tired. I've talked to people all day. When Gloria wants to talk, and I have been talked out. I've used all my words up and beyond, and Gloria's got words to use. It's a sacrifice. Are we willing to sacrifice for the Lord? One of the immediate things that the conversion of Matthew did was arouse his concern for his friends. One of the first things it did. It aroused his concerns for them. And I think it's interesting because I think their inquisitiveness was aroused. Because look at what Matthew did. He walked away from everything. After I became a Christian, I went back to Chicago. I went to visit some friends. And I realized that life was radically different. And they realized that my life was radically different. You know what? It gave me an opportunity to share with them. It was a struggle. It was a struggle not to participate in the things that they were participating in at that time. Next week, we're going to look more at this part of Matthew's life, of his response to follow me, his response to Jesus, and what he does with it. You see, that's the next step of our lives. What are we going to do with it when we've made a commitment to follow Jesus? I hope you will make a commitment today. I hope that today, as you've considered this life of Matthew, that it will spur you on to say, boy, will I consider the cost? Will I follow Jesus? Am I willing to give up my way for his way? It could mean radical changes in your life. It should, to follow him. Are you willing to pay the cost? Are you willing to say, as Jesus did, Father, not my will, but your will be done?